were central to Dr. King's work. Each year, the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, which was founded by Coretta Scott King in 1968, establishes a theme. The theme for this year is It Starts With Me, shifting priorities to create the beloved community. Tonight, you will hear from our esteemed key speaker, but also from our very own Adel Carey, Dr. Sonia Trent Brown, and President Matthew Scogan. Adel Carey provides leadership as a Step 6 Success Coordinator through the Men's Enrichment Network and through the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. Dr. Sonia Trent Brown is a professor of the Psychology Department and Vice President for Culture and Inclusive Excellence at Hope, and she will serve as a moderator tonight. President Matthew Scogan is a 2002 graduate of Hope who assumed office as the 14th president, and his vision for Hope Forward aims to ensure access for every student who comes through our doors in an environment that is faithful, welcoming, and transformational. Before President Scogan introduces our keynote speaker, we thought it would be appropriate to open this event by raising our voices together as one, together in song. We will be singing the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, which was written by brothers James Weldon and Johns Rosamond Johnson as a rallying cry for perseverance and social justice. I invite us all to stand together as we are able, both in person and virtual, in body or in spirit. And we will be led and sing together by this video rendition.
Voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come
You may be seated. Let us march on until victory is won. Amen. Please join me in welcoming President Scogan to introduce our wonderful speaker.
Thanks, Mary. It's so good to hear your singing voices tonight. Thank you for being here. And to those who are joining us online, thank you for being with us. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Gail Christopher. We are so honored to have her joining us this evening for our annual MLK lecture. Of course, this year, our MLK lecture occurs as one event in a series of events and conversations that we've been having over the course of this year on racial justice and the Christian gospel. Dr. Christopher is an award-winning and nationally recognized author, scholar, public speaker, and change agent. In her role as senior advisor and vice president of the Kellogg Foundation, she was the vision and the driving force behind the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation effort. We at Hope College are proud to be one of the TRHT campus centers. By the way, there are 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States. There are only 49 campus centers, and we at Hope College are very proud to be one of those 49. Dr. Christopher has spent more than 30 years. She's got more than 30 years of experience designing and managing national initiatives and nonprofit organizations. She currently serves as the executive director of the National Collaborative for Health Equity. Among other impressive things that she's done in her career, she's served as the vice president of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. She's served as a guest fellow at the Brookings Institution, and she's served as the executive director of the Institute for Government Innovation at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. She's written 3 books and has another book that will be coming out soon. She's appeared in every newspaper that you have heard of. She's been on CBS, PBS, Good Morning America, and here's how you know that Dr. Christopher is truly a big deal. She's been on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Her talk tonight is called Hope, Creating the Beloved Community. And the format of her talk will be a moderated conversation, a moderated fireside chat with our own Dr. Sonia Trent Brown moderating the discussion. Dr. Trent Brown is a professor of psychology and currently serves as our vice president for culture and inclusive excellence. And by the way, she spoke in chapel just last week also on the beloved community. So I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this evening, and I will turn it over to you, Dr. Trent Brown, to moderate the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, President Scogan. It's so good to see you all here tonight. And Dr. Christopher, we are just blessed that you are able to be with us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Trent Brown.
So Dr. Christopher, what factors inspired and motivated you to have a life of service as a social change agent?
Thank you for that question. You know, it's kind of a long story. First of all, let me say that I did grow up or come of age, you know, during the civil rights era. And so that was the ethos that said, you know, you stand for justice, you fight for right. And in many ways, you know, I think of the word hope, which is a feeling of expectation for the desired state. And in that time, and those great leaders all had a core feeling of expectation for change and for fairness. So I came up in that age, and I think that was part of it. But the real driving factor, my firstborn child died in infancy, and she was only 3 months old when she passed. Her congenital heart defect was caught or diagnosed at her 6-week checkup. And they told us to take her home because there was nothing that could be done for her until she was 5 years old. And so we did that, only to have her pass, you know, make her transition just a few weeks after that diagnosis. it was it was a few, many decades really later that I learned that in fact, the surgery that might have saved her life had actually been invented at least 30 years before she was born, and that it had saved the lives of tens of thousands of babies. She was a blue baby. She happened to be an African-American blue baby, but it was a reminder not only of the epidemic of infant mortality in the Black community for me, but also the medical care inequity and disparity. But once we lost her in Tiana, I dedicated myself to learning as much as I could about healthy pregnancies and having healthy babies. And when I went into clinical practice, much of my practice were women who had lost babies or were trying to have healthy pregnancies. And so that was really the personal experience that drove me into a life of focus on health and health inequities and trying to bring about health equity. Now, I should say that I went on to have two other very healthy children who are adults now, and I was able to welcome into this world my first grandchild about 3 years ago. So, but the real driver for me in terms of the realization how unjust and unfair this idea of disparity and inequity in terms of health and access to the conditions that promote health, that really was driven by my own personal loss.
Oh my goodness. Just the weight of that and the fact that it impacts so many, that really sits with so many of us in just such a powerful way. As you think about continuing this work and those who are coming alongside to continue moving the work forward, Hope College is now one of dozens of colleges working with the Association of American Colleges and Universities to establish truth, racial healing, and transformation campus centers. Can you tell us more about the TRHT and its origins and the potential that you think it has to continue moving this work forward?
Thank you so much for that question. And I am just so proud that your college, that Hope College, is one of the many colleges that are participating. And the spiritual or religious underpinnings of your education, there are a few colleges and universities in the expanding network that are grounded in various faith traditions. And I'm excited about that too, because this work is really about actualizing the core tenets of most of the world's great faiths and religions about our humanity, understanding the equal value and worth of all people. I can say to this group that I really prayed for guidance as I was going to leave the foundation. And it was in answer to that prayer that the concept of truth, racial healing, and transformation emerged or was impressed in my consciousness. And I reached out to the foundation president, and she was eager and responsive, as was the board of directors of the Kellogg Foundation. And so, it was born from a request for guidance to move forward our agenda for healing and for transformation of this country. It basically was the culmination, and you can look at that in many ways. There's some who say when we go to sleep, our cognitive faculties work to give us answers. So that's one way to look at that. If you're a religious person, you might view it as answer to prayer. But in any case, I woke up with the concept, right? And but it was an outgrowth of more than many decades, but particularly at the Kellogg Foundation, we had been working in an initiative called America Healing. And the America Healing work had gone on for several years with working with communities across this country who were already committed to racial equity and racial healing. And that work taught us so much. And we really built on the understanding, the evaluation, the lessons learned from well over $100 million in grants around the country, quietly working with justice organizations and advocacy organizations and diverse communities, engaging all people and communities in the work. And so that really undergirded, if you will, the courage to say it was time for America to do what other countries have done, but we had never really done on a national level, which is a truth and reconciliation process. So there have been over 40 truth and reconciliation efforts following conflicts, and in some cases addressing historic wrongs. But we as a country had never done that. And so we approached it by assessing what were the lessons to be learned from other countries. And there were some critical lessons about making sure that the truth telling is also connected to action for justice and real tangible change. And that led to the creation of our framework for this work, which is inspired by truth and reconciliation. But we don't use the word reconciliation because it connotes coming back together, which has often been the case around the world. We understand that America was built on the fallacy of a hierarchy of human value. Now, that's my way of saying racism, but focusing in on the belief system that gives permission for racism. And so we knew that that belief system has to be jettisoned. I'm a Star Trek fan, so I like that phrase. You know, the idea, the fundamental permission to devalue human beings, that's the root work. You know, if you don't get to the root of a problem, the problem is not really solved. If you don't get to the foundation of a problem, you know, you're really not going to bring about the transformation. So the work of truth, racial healing, and transformation, we say transformation and we say healing because we want to acknowledge the tremendous suffering. It's immeasurable, the amount of suffering in this country and around the world that's rooted in this fallacy of a hierarchy of human value. And then we know that we really have to not just reconcile, but we have to transform this country. Many people don't realize that there was a reconciliation of sorts after the Civil War. The southern states and the northern states, they reconciled, but they reconciled on the same lie, on the same fallacy of a hierarchy of human value. Now, the legal institution of slavery ended, and various congressional legislative things suggested there would be equal opportunity, but you know the struggles that have gone on long since, you know, the Civil War and the first civil rights movement. So that fundamental undergirding permission to view the human family in a hierarchical way, that's a big part of the work of truth, racial healing, and transformation, getting rid of that, replacing it with the sacred privilege of honoring our interconnectedness and our interdependence as an equal human family. So I'll quickly say the 5 pillars of the work. It begins with narrative change, which is what I've been talking about, changing, you know, our understanding, changing our stories, driving forth a new model of human relatedness that is grounded in equity and fairness. And then doing the work of building relationships. We call that pillar racial healing and relationship building, understanding that you can't really change a mind until you touch the heart. And so the racial healing work is about touching hearts and building relationships and having the privilege, the awe, the wonder of really connecting with people that are different from ourselves. And then when we do that core work of telling the truth, changing the story, replacing the lies with the truth, and then replacing our fear and separation from one another with deeper connective tissue and deeper relationships, then we get to the business of changing the systems and the structures of inequity. And we asked ourselves, how has this lie of a hierarchy of human value, of a taxonomy of the human family, how has it possibly lasted for all these centuries? And we came up with three basic ways or vehicles for maintaining racial hierarchy. And the first is separation. And separation takes so many forms. Everything from the taking of the lands of indigenous people, to the child welfare inequities, to the cradle to prison pipeline, to residential segregation and school segregation. Separation is a primary tool of maintaining the fallacy of racial hierarchy. And then we have a legal system that was rooted in this racial hierarchy and has been designed to help perpetuate that racial hierarchy. And we became acutely aware of that in 2020 with the brutal murder of George Floyd and the standing up, the mobilizing of over 20 million people to stand for justice. But even our voting system is part of the legal system, and that's always been a struggle for the right to vote. And then finally, the economy. The economy exploits racial hierarchy, and we have to transform our economy to offer more equity and fairness. And so those are the 5 pillars of truth, racial healing, and transformation. And the last word of your question was potential. I wake up every morning with such excitement and joy. We just had the National Day of Racial Healing, the 6th National Day of Racial Healing. And this movement is gaining traction around this country. And in fact, there is a movement at the federal level. Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Senator Cory Booker have proposed that there be a federal effort for truth, racial healing, and transformation, and that it serve as a support and a backbone to the expanding local efforts in communities across this country.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is so exciting to hear. Now, I would ask you, we are here at the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Civil Rights Lecture. How does the TRHT work align with Dr. King's vision for beloved community?
You know, Dr. King and his wife, Coretta Scott King, they really popularized the concept of the beloved community. And it's a society in which everyone is cared for. There is no longer hunger and poverty. We have a society that truly embraces the humanity of all. And that's really what TRHT is trying to put in place, both from a standpoint of the psychological and narrative and relational ethos, as well as the policies and practices and structures that have to happen in a democratic society. And so we think the TRHT work really does carry forward the vision of a beloved community, and the people that are involved in it, you know, they do have the hope, they do have the feeling, the expectation that we can, in fact, do this. And that is the exciting part. It is a comprehensive, community-based and national effort that is grounded in the expectation of success and transformation.
Oh, that is fantastic. I believe that we have a video that we would like to get an opportunity to share as well.
We do, that would be great. This is of communities around the country who are doing the work.
All right.
Maybe not.
Maybe, let's see. Well, while we are Oh, yes, we do. Wonderful.
America needs truth. Our people need healing. Our society needs transformation. But how? We've had commissions before, and we still have not learned the lessons of our past. This time will be different. This time, we will learn from the wisdom of our communities and engage in a national grassroots effort to write a new American story.
Ultimately, racism is a belief system. It's an ideology. It's a way of seeing the world. And it is the legacy of that belief system that we live with.
The work has already begun. In small towns and city centers, meeting in libraries, churches, and on college campuses, from Alaska to Louisiana.
How do we get over our fixation on this absurd notion of racial hierarchy?
Since it was developed by nearly 200 experts in 2016, the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation framework has been used by dozens of communities across the country with the goal of uprooting the conscious and unconscious belief in a hierarchy of human value. To craft the framework for local TRHT commissions, we drew on the study of over 40 global examples of truth and reconciliation commissions. The framework is simple but powerful, and it works. Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation guides folks through a process of learning and unlearning that ultimately creates a new community history, one that doesn't hide the ugly truth and weaves the stories of all local peoples. Over years of experience, practitioners have learned that relationship building by stakeholders in the community is an essential ingredient to overcome divides. On this basis of healing through storytelling and understanding, community members collaboratively craft plans for creating transformational change to the laws, economic rules, and physical structures that keep us apart and unequal. Empowered by a national commission and fueled by grassroots energy, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation will help usher in a new America that lives up to its highest ideals, where all of us can thrive.
Where all of us can thrive. So that is the vision. And that's the vision of beloved community. Well, Dr. Christopher, when you're in those spaces that we saw depicted in the video, what does that feel like? What is that energy? What's that sense in the room when you're with the people in those situations and they're doing the work and engage with one another, and what we just heard about in the sharing of stories?
You're really describing in some ways the healing part of it, the racial healing part of it, and it really is a special place. Well facilitated by people who know how to hold a space. You know, Dr. King is often, the focus is always on his dream. But as you said early on in our introduction, I think that his real focus was on love. And Dr. King understood, and he equated love to the presence of God. And I think that when we do this work, there is a humility that is there, I think, in the well-prepared facilitators. And they come into the space with the intention of honoring the full humanity of everyone that is in the room, that everyone who is in the circle, to see them as the full reflection of divinity that they are. And so you do have that palpable sense of of we're in this together, and us being in this together is important not only to us, but to future generations. And when you bring, and this is the critical part of it, bringing Native American and Indigenous people, Asian American, Pacific Islander, African American, whites, Latino, Hispanic, people of different identities in terms of gender. It's bringing all these people together for the purpose of hearing our common humanity expressed through our stories. And the process is designed with prompts that actually relate to human motivational needs. And everyone shares a story in response to the same prompt. So even though we're all very different, the stories that we're sharing, we find the similarity in our humanity in those stories. And when you've heard the stories of 24 or 26 people that are different from you, there is something that begins to melt away. Now there's social science and psychological science that undergirds this notion, but there's something about allowing ourselves to be in the presence and to be truly the presence, of love and caring and listening and sharing, that has a very powerful and lasting impact. And it's always a joy to be there. It is not a calling out of people about their adherence to racial hierarchy. It's a calling in of people to say we can have a new model for how we can relate to one another. And within that new model, we can find our way forward to transform this country.
Well, I would say amen. And, love and listening is something that we talk a lot about at Hope College. We want to be able to share our stories and connect in ways where our dialogue and discourse is characterized by love and listening. And as a community of faith, I would ask you, how does the TRHT reflect those ancient values and tenets of Christianity?
I've been reading a little lately about, ancient Christianity, going back to the Essenes and the really ancient Christianity. And I've been struck by the meditative, contemplative disciplines that are part of ancient Christianity. And I think that is one way. I mean, if you're going to facilitate these types of gatherings and you're going to be trusted with the emotional fragility of people, you want to bring into that space as a facilitator a certain amount of discipline, a certain amount of practice in contemplation and meditation and self-awareness, so that you really are able to put your best self forward and truly demonstrate compassion and care for others. Self-compassion is a very important tenet of the work. And, that aligns very well with Christianity. That is what Jesus taught us, was compassion, and enabled people to share or to experience self-compassion. So that's one of the things that aligns very beautifully with the ancient tenets. And certainly the willingness to be charitable and to give of ourselves, our emotional selves, our loving selves. We aren't going to find our way forward out of our divisions without some true humility and some recognition of the insanity, of the divisions, and some recognition of the privilege that we all experience collectively in being part of a democracy that is still becoming. So I think there's so much about this work that is reflective of ancient Christian traditions and the ancient faith traditions around the world that are really rooted in compassion, self-compassion, the extension of love. You can't give what you don't have. So self-compassion precedes, the extension of compassion. and the embracing of the humanity of all of us, because our humanity is a sacred gift and reflection.
All right. Now, your book, RX Racial Healing, Prescription Racial Healing, A Guide to Our Common Humanity, was just released on the National Day of Racial Healing.
That's true.
So why did you write this book?
But I ask myself that every day as I struggle to do that and run an organization and blah, blah, blah. But I wrote the book because I want to see the work go to scale around the country. And so the book is really sort of a handbook, a guidebook. It actually has, curriculum pages in it, so to say, this is the objective, these are the reasons you do this. This is how much time you devote to it. The racial healing circle process, it seems like one simple experience, but it's really several things that are part of it. So I wanted to make sure that people knew the components of the process, and that they knew the importance of working with someone else and the importance of being part of a community. And so I just really wanted to accelerate the work. But I also wanted people to understand, more than 200 jurisdictions have now declared racism to be a public health crisis. And the CDC has finally, after decades, asserted the direct link between exposure to racism and the serious health problems that we face. COVID-19 forced us to stop denying the reality of racism as a threat to public health. And so when I say prescription racial healing, I am really saying, we have to connect the dots here, and we have to understand that we are accelerating our deficits, and we are costing our country so much needless expense, and by allowing racism to continue. And this is a prescription, literally, and the pathways by which racism gets under the skin and sets up vulnerability. We've always known it set vulnerability to chronic disease, but again, COVID-19 has shown us how the vulnerabilities of racism and its consequences make us compromise our immune systems in many ways. And in fact, those chronic diseases help to compromise our immune system. So this is a health issue for us as a country to overcome racism. It is also an issue as it relates to the viability of our democracy. It was Abraham Lincoln who said, "A house divided against itself, cannot stand." And he predicted that if there were ever to be a destruction of this aspirational democracy, it would come from within. And what we saw around the country, in Michigan and in Washington, in terms of the permission to be violent for political ends, that is an anathema in terms of democracy, the democracy that we all have been privileged to inherit. And Confederate flags were carried into the Capitol. And so the undergirding of racial ideology is there in these great political divisions. So even from the standpoint of not just the physical human body, but the body politic, we must come to grips with this challenge and put our best selves forward. And so I just wanted to, and I'm so thankful that the Association of American Colleges and Universities, has published this book, and we've agreed that all the proceeds from the sales will go to support the expansion of the college campuses. And so I wrote this book as another way of contributing to the acceleration of the work. And I also wanted to, as I said, help people to see the skills that are required to co-facilitate it, to understand the difference between the racial healing work and other forms of standing up for racial justice. There are different types of work that we can do, And each type of work has its own place, you know, in the broader panoply of effort. And I wrote it because I also wanted to tell my own story of my own journey to taking this particular approach.
Well, let me be one to say thank you. We appreciate that you are taking this opportunity and others to share your story with us and your journey with us. I think we are the honored recipients. So I, for one, am grateful, and I'm sure that there are many others as well.
Thank you.
Dr. Christopher, how does your current leadership role with the National Collaborative for Health Equity further your life's mission and purpose?
Well, thank you for that question. And I as you know, once you're in philanthropy, it's hard to get it out of your system. And so I do miss my glory days at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and will be forever indebted to them, to that environment, and to all my colleagues and friends there who continue this work and continue to support it. And that is just such an honor that the work continues, and the hundreds of people around the country who are part of the work. At the National Collaborative for Health Equity, you know, our vision is to end racism and the health inequities that it creates. And so I'm able to continue to work from there. We work to help to support and develop leaders, because every movement, every effort requires leaders who don't burn out, leaders who are supported by the love of one another, but also the grace, you know, of philanthropy. And so we have a new leadership program that is built around the TRHT framework, and we're very excited. We're bringing in our first cohort of leaders in May. There'll be 40 in each group, and they are in the program for 18 months. But we also use data because, you know, data tells a narrative, data tells a story. And we believe that we've got to stop using our data to reinforce and reiterate the negative. We've got to start using our data to shape the opportunity. So we have a project, ironically, that's called the Hope Data Initiative. And what we do is we frame our data around what needs to be done to create equal opportunity. So you might look at your state, it's an interactive website, and it will tell you, well, 350,000 more people, you know, need access to affordable housing, or, you know, 500,000 more people need to be food secure, so that it helps decision makers and legislators talk about the action that needs to be taken and the policies that need to be created to actually bring about equity and bring about health equity. We're very proud of the Hope Data system and its opportunity focus. And then finally, we work with campuses, with organizations to partner to help apply, because the TRHT is a framework, and I discussed the pillars, but it's also a process. And the first step in the process is bringing together these diverse groups in terms of multi-sector collaboration. So you have people who have power in the media space. You have people who have power in terms of the faith communities and helping to drive the imperative of emotional intelligence and connection. And then you have developers, and you have people in the legal system, and you have people in the economic system. And then you work with these groups to go through a step-by-step process of actually envisioning the change that you're going to create. And, you know, in social change, we're so problem focused. We just don't spend enough time believing and creating the vision for the new dispensation. So all of the TRHT efforts, whether they're organizational or community or you know, the nation, they start with creating a shared vision for an America that has eliminated racism. Just sit with that for a minute. Can you imagine if a critical mass of people in this country are actually envisioning an America that has truly eliminated racism? and they understand what that will look like and what that will feel like. And that is their expectation. As I say it, I get goosebumps because I imagine, what the world will say when America has really done this, when we have faced our past for the intention of creating a new vision for a future. And so there are 5 steps that everyone goes through in the process. It begins with the vision, and then it's followed by a very honest, authentic analysis of the current reality within the context of that vision, so we can figure out how far we have to go, right? And then we get into, who needs to be at that table to make that vision happen, who has the authority, who has the leadership position, who in the community has to advocate. And then we come up with very specific recommendations for action, both in the short term and in the long term for sustainability. So, and that's done for each of the pillars of TRHT. So this is real work that communities do together, as was, epitomized in the video or captured in the video. And it is, it's very exciting work. And I have faith that it's going to reach a critical mass, and it's going to help to transform this country.
That is an amazing, amazing vision. That sounds like the beloved community in action.
I'm so glad you said that, because that is the experience of being in it, in the sense of people are working together. And there's some in the social work field and sociology that would say clearly the best way to bring communities together is for them to work together to solve problems. So, and if you go visit the Kellogg Foundation website, they have done a beautiful look back over the first 3 years of the work, and they talk about and tell stories about what's happening on the ground in communities. The AACU, the colleges have also captured some of the lessons and experiences around the country. And it is important because it is building relationships, it is building capacity. And it's, I wish we heard about it on the news instead of all this divisive stuff. Maybe one day we will.
Yes, that would be phenomenal. It really would. Well, Dr. Christopher, as we think about these things, as we think about the work, as we think about the actions, we think about communities coming together, what are some of the most important lessons that you have extracted from these experiences? Some of the important life lessons that you've garnered over the decades of being in the work, of being on the journey, that you would like to impart to our students and to the broader community?
Thank you. I was reflecting as we listened to the Black national anthem, Negro national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And, if you live long enough, things take on a deeper meaning. And I was listening to that phrase that says the faith that the dark past has taught us. My mother-in-law used to say, whenever I was troubled, she would say, things will work out. They always do. And she said it with such knowing, that it actually gave me a sense of comfort. And I think about that phrase, the faith that the dark past has taught us. And I think about all the experiences that I have had in my life that were quite traumatic in many ways. I shared the story of the loss of my firstborn. And there are many, many other stories, but which would constitute a dark past for me. But I had the gift of faith, and which enabled the perseverance and the joy. Joy cometh in the morning, some folks say. And so the joy does come, and it did come. And so one of the little tidbits of life experience wisdom I would share with students and with anyone, because we're in kind of a dark time right now. So many deaths and so much grieving. and then so much tension and concern about the future of our country. And so I would say faith is really important. And faith is a gift, I believe. And if we ask for it, we'll be given it. And so I think faith is a very important lesson for us all to have and to hold on to. This too will pass, and we will move forward as a country and as a people. The other important lesson, and I will draw from Dr. King, he's quoted for many things, but one of his most enduring quotes is that love is the most powerful force in the universe. And it is the moral cosmos, if you will. It's the heartbeat of the moral cosmos. And I really love that he puts so much emphasis on love. And love is not to be, minimized. I think he's absolutely right. It is a force. It is the most powerful force. And as we align with that force, we are instruments for the change, for the progression, for the development of humanity. And so aligning with love and love and fear can't occupy the same space at the same time. And so finding that contemplative, meditative, spiritual, religious way of being in a place of love, an expectation of love, an extension of love, that is what allows us to thrive and to remain whole in the face of what would appear to be contradictions. The other important lesson, I think, there's a chapter in my book that is called 4 Decades in the Making. I wish I had called it Catching Up with the Ancestors. It had already gone to press before I made that decision. But our journey is really one of catching up with the wisdom of civilizations and indigenous cultures that have predated us and preceded us, and the lineage of which we have the privilege of connecting with now in many places. But there was a sense of alignment with nature, respect for nature, humility, a sense of commitment to future generations, and feeling a sense of responsibility to create an ethos and a set of circumstances that would support the life of future generations. And so I really encourage us to recognize that there is wisdom and there is knowledge and that there are different ways of knowing, and to decolonize our own minds, if you will, to the degree that we embrace our own lineages, mine back to Africa in most to a dominant degree. But the wisdom of our ancestors is there for us, both by asking for it and by reading about it and by connecting with representatives of those great cultures and communities. And I guess the final lesson I would impart is really about self-love and self-compassion. We cannot give what we don't have. Mm. And so and you said that was the theme from the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolence. It does begin with me. It begins with compassion for myself, for me, that is actualized in self-care, in all those disciplines of self-care, from movement to hydration, to peaceful time, to contemplation, to relationship, all the things we know that make us whole as human beings. And then, being easy on ourselves when we're not perfect, because none of us are, right? So self-compassion it fertilizes the soul so that we're able to extend kindness and love to others.
Oh, yes. Well, again, I say amen.
I'm not preaching.
It's all right with me if you do. Oh, my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Christopher, for your wisdom, for your candor, for your joy, for your deeply insightful responses to the questions, for just for this conversation. I've just been blessed by it thus far. At this time, I would like to offer an opportunity to open up to questions from our audience, from our viewers as well. And to do that, we have a link that we would like to share. And there is, we will get that here if you'd like to submit a question. So it's link.hope.edu, MLK QA. I'll say that again, link.hope.edu/MLKQA. You can see that on your screen to submit a question.
And can I, while we're waiting for questions, can I just say what an honor it is for me to be participating in this celebration with your community? I am deeply honored to have been invited.
Thank you. Thank you. It is truly a blessing. It is truly a blessing to have you with us tonight. While we are allowing some time for questions to come in, I'm just going to, if I may, since you mentioned self-care, might I ask what are some of the practices that you have?
Yeah, you can.
and engaged in, because you've invested so much, and and health is again so very important. So what are some of the ways that you have taken space to preserve your health over the time that you've been engaged in the work?
Well, and I'll start with my more recent understandings, but there is a wonderful approach called the Polyvagal Theory, and Stephen Porges is the discoverer, if you will, the inventor of that theory, and he really delves into our basic human need for feeling safe through our connections and relationships with others. And so and he says that, and there's another comparable theory somewhat called the general theory of love, and it talks about how we learn to resonate with and be in sync with relationship and with other human beings. And Porges says if you're not in daily interaction and in relationship with another human being, then you at least need to be in relationship with a mammal of some type or a pet, right? And so after I retired from the Kellogg Foundation, I actually did get a dog, and because I knew I'd be, doing a lot of writing and contemplating, and honestly, having Ella as a companion in my life over this pandemic has been life-saving, and we cannot overstate how important human connection is, and the isolation that many people have experienced during the pandemic has to be balanced by opportunities for connection. So I really want to drive home that this is part of what we need. We thrive as human beings by having this resonance and also feeling safe. And when we don't feel safe, it sets up this cascade of inflammation and stress that the body was never designed to be in a constant state of alarm. And so knowing that, and whatever brings you peace and makes you feel safe, that's an important part. For me, it's a spiritual path. And of course, having Ella bark loudly if anybody shows up that shouldn't be in the vicinity is helpful too. But that sense of safety is really vital. The other thing that there's emerging literature, there's a whole movement, Children in Nature Network, this idea that time in nature it helps to reduce literally the cortisol, the stress hormones. We are part of nature. And when we acknowledge that and have the luxury of being near water, near trees, near greenery, near plants, near, gardens. I am privileged to have a few acres that are part forest and artesian springs. And, that is the Center for Healing in Nature here in Maryland that I've opened and named in honor of my firstborn child that passed. It's called the Intianu Center for Healing in Nature. So time in nature is a very important consideration. Another thing that doesn't get enough attention in our lives is the importance of hydration. We are mostly water, as is the planet, and so you're really moving forward for health and well-being when we stay really, really well hydrated, and not just in what we drink, but in what we eat, and so if we eat fresh vegetables and fruits to a large measure, we're going to be taking in a hydrating diet. And so hydration is absolutely critically important to health and well-being. And of course, movement. I didn't say exercise because I know there's some of us, if we hear the word exercise, we shut down. So I say movement, but walking and standing have been shown to be really, really important in longevity, particularly as we age. And so movement and walking are essential components of self-care. So I'll stop there, but I hope that was helpful.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. Oh, we have some additional questions that are coming in.
Okay.
And what awareness, work, or actions would you recommend to those of us who are not currently involved in social justice work? What first steps might you suggest?
Wow, what a perfect question. Thank you for that question. I think reading can be extremely powerful to help, strengthen our sense of resolve and courage. And I'm going to do a shameless plug for my daughter's book, which is called The Sum of Us: What Racism Costs Us All and How We Can Prosper Together. And her name is Heather McGee. But that book seems to be a nice on-ramp for a lot of people who are not currently involved and engaged. So I really encourage that. I also encourage you to connect through your church or your community with people who are engaged, and to do so, with a sense of humility and an expectation of being welcomed. Not to overextend initially, something as simple as, volunteering to help plan an event in the community. But definitely you have to connect. We have to connect with others if we're actually going to make a difference. So that is those are two steps. And I'm talking to a faith-based community. So honestly, I think prayer is a very important source of guidance. If you have a religious leaning or a spiritual leaning, I have found that asking for guidance is really a powerful tool for finding out which way to go.
Right. That might be a great place to start with the next question. And that's, how do we shift our minds to focus on a spiritual love that Martin Luther King Jr. preached about until the time of his death?
Wow, these are great questions. How do we do it?
Mm-hmm.
As you can see from my background, I love books. And I think reading, Howard Thurman was an amazing theologian and philosopher and African-American minister who offered so much guidance from a spiritual perspective. One of his books is called Jesus and the Disinherited, which is really powerful. And in fact, he was kind of a guide and mentor for Martin Luther King Jr., actually. Um, I think reading the biographies of some of the world's greatest social change leaders drives home the spiritual underpinnings that were there for all of them. Now, how we do that for ourselves, is varied. Some people, it's very popular today for people to say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And so, where the role of the church in the past was a very strong force for getting people to that place. If you think of either the abolition movement or the civil rights movement, these ecumenical movements involve churches and faith leaders to drive them. And we don't have enough of that. The church isn't doing enough, I don't think, to drive us toward the beloved community today. But connecting to what is the heartbeat of our essence, which is our spirituality, I think. And so I think being more vocal about that aspect of Dr. King's vision, they've turned his celebration into a day of service, and that's okay. But he lived and died so that we would create the beloved community, and that would mean ending racism and the tremendous injustices. And so I think that we need to lift that up more and say that injustice, right, is an anathema to peace and an anathema to the beloved community. And again, Dr. King said that, peace is not just the absence of tension. Peace is the presence of justice. And so we really have to see that these things are connected, and they're connected to our very survival as a species, and certainly to our survival as a democracy. I highly recommend Jamie Raskin's new book, where he tells the painful story of the loss of his son and how it motivated him and his role, in Congress. There's something about that human connection as he grieves his son through the book, but you're recognizing that this is a spiritual journey for this man. And it's a journey that's all about ethics and about courage and about standing up for values of fairness. So that's a long-winded answer, but I think there's so much wisdom in books, and there's so much wisdom within us if we tap it and we connect with others.
Well, thank you, Dr. Christopher. You've mentioned several books that are wonderful recommendations. Is there a book that is one that has made the greatest impact on your own perspective on reality? Yes. And if there's more than one, that's okay. We're going to write those down too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think we all have we're building a summer reading list.
I recently, I think the more recent biography of Frederick Douglass is amazing. And I think it's Frederick Douglass, The Prophet of Freedom. I may mess that up a little bit, but if you Google the more recent biography of Frederick Douglass, it is amazing. And if you listen to it on audio, the reader just takes you back, to that time in history. Another book that helps to pull the wool off our eyes about how this lie of racial hierarchy has been maintained. It's called Race and Reunion, and it's by the same author of the Frederick Douglass biography. And its subtitle is The Memory of the Civil War. And it really tells how, this great lie was perpetuated, that the Civil War was not fought over slavery or the right to enslave. So those are two very powerful books, and he's an amazing author. The other one that I recommend highly is called Slavery by Another Name, and it talks about how slavery actually continued in America up until World War II. So those are I think that's three very important books. Let me see. Another one that is very instructive, most people don't realize that the Nazi platform was informed by the racist policies in America, that the people who made up that regime came here and studied our practices and went back and put in place the Nuremberg laws that became Nazi Germany and led to so much death and suffering. Hitler's American Model is the name of that book. I highly recommend it. So those are some. I guess you're thinking, where's my inspirational reading? All these books are about racial justice, and you know, it's hard to recommend inspirations because everyone has their own religious, directions. But yeah, those are a few. If I think of some others, I'll recommend them. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you. I think we will definitely have some reading groups and discussions opportunities here. There are a few questions here that come from students, and some of the ones that we've asked may have as well, but I want to specifically make sure we get a chance to offer these. How can students get involved in joining places of racial healing? Mm-hmm. So are there opportunities for students to get involved?
Well, I would say a big fat yes on that. The Association of American Colleges and Universities holds an institute every summer where campuses send groups of people. And so I would start to lobby the TRHT leadership on your campus to be part of that summer institute, if possible, for AACU. I offer trainings here in Maryland at least 4 times a year, and we would and they're virtual now by necessity, right? And so we'll continue to offer virtual trainings, even when we can one day return to in-person connections. And so we certainly welcome students to be engaged, and sometimes students get engaged as volunteers because they can't afford to pay for it. We do have scholarships for students sometimes. So I think that's another way to become involved. And there's a movement, a national TRHT movement. It's a coalition. They have calls every month. And getting on those calls, there are about 300 organizations that are participating in those calls, and they all, every one of them have student, engagement opportunities. So yeah, there's a lot that you can do. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's fantastic. I think that you have named some action steps that you think that students at Hope College can begin doing right now. So that's fantastic.
And can I add to that too? I met a young woman who's a student in college, and she attended that institute for AACU almost accidentally. And she just took it upon herself to start doing racial healing circles with her family, with her community, with her friends. And I was taken aback by that. I said, well, look at you. And so she's learned a lot now that she's read my book, but I really, you can do that. You can just say, you know what, I'm going to do this work.
All right, excellent. And so when there are opportunities for racial healing circles on campus, then you would encourage students to take the opportunity to get involved.
I certainly would. And I would really encourage you. I said this earlier today when I met with students. You should have a cadre of students who know how to facilitate these circles, who understand the work, who can be supports for one another. So, with your campus, I would say you'd want to have at least 26 people.
All right. So if there are folks who are interested, we would welcome opportunities to hear from you and to have you join with us. We have a few more questions here. Some people find themselves in conversations about race with people who refuse to acknowledge the need for racial healing because they see equality on paper as enough. What advice would you give to people in those situations? How can we convince them of this necessity?
I get that question a lot. And you know that concept of a coalition of the willing.
Yes.
I'm not in favor of trying to convince people, nor am I in favor of conversations about race. They tend to be, rabbit trails. And so I think that if you start to focus more on what's to be gained and the common humanity and the common stake that we have, the common costs, the common risks, less on the deficit frame, but more on, we tend to be self-motivated. So, and I think that's why my daughter's book has had such a powerful impact. She talks about what it's costing all of us, to keep the same patterns in place that we have. Now it's backed up with 300 pages of references, but maybe 150, but getting people to see that there is something in it for you. You're not going to lose anything by helping to make our society more equitable and more fair. And so I would spend less time convincing people of the disparities and the inequities, and more time showing people and motivating people to see that, we all have a stake in this. Trying to combat or to convince, in an intellectual way, you are not going to change minds if you haven't touched the heart. And so I really encourage finding the connection. And, in some spiritual traditions, there's this concept of as-isness, accepting people where they are, not judging, not blaming, not projecting. And once people feel accepted for where they are, they're much more likely to listen and much more likely to even possibly change their opinion. So.
Okay. Here's a question. How can a white individual take steps to seek reconciliation and create room for unity to be celebrated, but also recognize the hurt and injustice that has existed and continues to exist today?
Wow, these are some powerful questions.
Indeed.
Well, it's hard for me to say what a white individual can do. Do I have time to share a brief story?
Yes.
One of my earliest exposures to the burden that white people can carry, especially if they're moving from a heart-centered space. I went off to an encampment when I was about 15 in Chautauqua, New York. It was an arts encampment. And for the first time in my life, I lived with white people, right? And I had a roommate that was white. And we became the best of friends. And toward the end of the summer, I was walking home to our little Victorian house that we, all of us girls shared. And there was an ambulance in front of the house. And I ran to see what was going on. And they were actually carrying my roommate out on a stretcher. And she was not conscious. And I asked the dorm parents what had happened, and they told me she had attempted suicide. And I ran upstairs to our room, and she had left a note for me on my bed. And the note said, I don't want to go home. And her father was a police officer, by the way, in Cleveland. And she said, my father has taught me to hate Black people. And I don't want to live that lie anymore. Now, this was a vulnerable 15-year-old girl whose world was just shattered by the simple experience of having that lie refuted, So I'll never know if they saved her life or not, but it was certainly a life-changing experience for me to see the weight of racism and the facing of it. So I can't be in a totally empathetic space with you as a white person. And I say that with all humility. But I do know that it is by framing this as a belief system that, we've all drank the Kool-Aid on some level. And that's why acknowledging the belief system. Another book that is really powerful is called Stamped from the Beginning. And it's by Ibram Kendi. It's a National Book Award winning book. And he really chronicles in a definitive way how this idea became so embedded in our society. And so I think as a white person, that's been my experience in this work, giving people an on-ramp to focus on the idea, on the false narrative, on the consciousness work, and less on the personal guilt and responsibility. Guilt is not a good thing. Guilt either paralyzes us or we project it onto other people. And so having a way to frame this that allows you to say, yep, that was the idiocy, that was the big lie, that was the fallacy. Let's move on and create something that's grounded in what human genetics tells us now, what science tells us, that we are all an extended human family. And so I think that frame is helpful to help white people deal with this. And then to find your strength, to find your way of being part of the solution. But I leave the guilt at, leave it at the door. It's just, it's only gonna either paralyze you or make you sick. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, I think absolutely it's helpful. Dr. Christopher, there are more questions left. There are questions, I think, on our hearts, on our minds. And I wish that we could answer them all. I thank all of those who submitted questions. I thank you for just your authenticity and your insight, the wisdom, and thank you for feeding us so fully this evening in your responses to the questions. And thank you all for submitting the questions. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Dr. Christopher, for sharing with us about hope and about creating the beloved community. It has just been an absolute honor to be a part.
The honor has been mine, and you have been an amazing moderator and facilitator. You've made me feel so comfortable and so welcome. So thank you very much.
Well, at this time, please, everyone, join me in welcoming Adel Carey, Hope College class of 2022, to bring our closing remarks.
Good evening. I am Adel Carey, a senior studying political science, STEP Success Coordinator, and Men's Enrichment Network Leader at the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. We would like to thank Dr. Gail Christopher for her wonderful conversation and insightful remarks. Normally, we use the word community to describe the environments that we physically inhabit, such as this campus or the neighborhood you grew up in. But after this lecture, my dream is we not only occupy a space in our communities, but respond to their needs to bring solutions that are transformational and sustainable. The Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Framework aims to do just that through a community-based plan that addresses the historic and contemporary effects of racism. In her remarks, Dr. Christopher highlighted this through the need for America to reconcile and heal from its past by acknowledging the truth of racism and building towards a racial healing that unites the country. She also emphasized on the importance of listening and understanding others in a charitable way to experience healing in its full form. Lastly, she reminded us that if we are to sustain unity and a viable democracy in our country, we must make the crucial effort to look inward, have self-compassion, analyze our current realities, and work to build a community that defeats the hierarchy of human values. As members of the community, it is our responsibility to call to action and pursue equitable access to fundamental necessities such as health, education, and jobs. It is within our communities that we see racial disparities amongst a range of professional fields. It is also within our communities that we observe microaggressions and various forms of systemic racism. The community here at Hope College is no exception. It is important to respond to the call of action here on campus as it is our immediate community, and there is a lot we can do as individuals. When was the last time you took the opportunity to make this campus a better place for all students? How do you respond to the concerns and complaints of those who are around you who suffocate from subtle and constant transgressions? Do you actively advocate for change when you notice injustice in your community? Or do you go about your day knowing it has no effect on you? Dr. King says, our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls and a quantitative change in our lives. I hope that all of our souls are on their way to change for the better as we recognize and understand those around us. However, the implementations that follow the understanding of systemic racism are what will positively affect the community such as Hope College to address the issues that are faced by people who look like me. We would like to thank our terrific team of experts who helped make everything happen to make everything happen tonight. We are grateful for their innovations with the technology to bring our virtual and in-person spaces together, for the space and setup, and for the marketing and press release materials that invited everyone to be here. And we are thankful for each of you here in this physical space and connecting in the virtual space, reminding us that together we can surmount endless barriers and find ways to connect to continue to do the work to which we are being called. We would like to thank Dr. Sonia Trent Brown, Amber Tejeda from the Office of Culture and Inclusion for organizing this beautiful event. We would also like to thank Javon Willis and Margot Walters from the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, Leo Herzog, Freddie Valquez, Jonathan Fiegel, Ben Ugma from CIT, Sean Riley and Nick Serrano from the Jack Miller team, Paul Willard, Greg Olgers, and Katie Shands, and Elizabeth Council from Public Affairs and Marketing. We invite you all to join us on Wednesday, February 2nd from 7 to 9:30 p.m. at the Knickerbocker Theater for a screening of Coded Bias, sponsored by the Computer Science Department, Black Student Union, Women and Gender Studies, the Office of Sustainability, and the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. The documentary investigates the racial bias in facial recognition's algorithm and artificial intelligence technology. The screening will be followed by a panel discussion about the implication and impact on our day-to-day lives. Once again, to you, to Dr. Christopher, we extend our deepest gratitude for a wonderful remark today and for your beautiful words and for the challenge to embrace hope and create the beloved community we aspire. Thank you and have a good night.